Good evening and welcome to NovaraLIVE. Coming up tonight, Donald Trump survives a third shooter assassination attempt, though some online have a lot of questions. Green MP Hannah Spencer ignites an almighty row over MP's drinking culture. Russell Brand gets lost in the good book. And we ask, can stealing be an act of political resistance? And tonight, I'm joined by Ash Sarkar, who is back from her travels. Ash, tell us what you've been up to in the last few weeks.
I went to Australia to speak at a conference, and that was really fun. Met a lot of amazing activists and leftists. And then I went to Thailand for 3 weeks on holiday, and that was a lot less political, but there was a lot more massaman curry.
Sounds great. For the mole people that you left behind in the studio, that's a place that involves sand, wet stuff, giant lemon in the sky.
Oh, it was, and like monkeys, just like monkeys hanging out and like needlefish darting around. But I will say something which is going to sound incredibly sad. Even when I was on those idyllic beaches, I couldn't stop thinking about Novara and how excited I was to return.
That's both sad and very, very sweet. We're very glad to have you back, Ash. If you'd like to support our work, you can always sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And as ever, don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below. That was the moment the sound of gunfire rang out in the Washington Hilton Hotel on Saturday night, while US President Donald Trump, wife Melania, and a number of Trump's administration sat on stage. The event was the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That's an annual function that Trump hasn't attended since he was roasted by then-President Barack Obama and comedian Seth Meyers in 2011. But as the shots were fired just outside the ballroom, those at the top of the table were pretty slow to react. So as you could see there, 5 shots are heard, but those on stage continue interacting with professional mind reader Oz Perlman for quite a while. It's only once those seated for dinner in the main hall start panicking that Trump, Melania, and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt react to the scenes as the security services storm the stage. Now, for those who want the deep cut, Perlman was busy trying to work out the name of the baby of White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. That's a baby that's that she's due to give birth to very soon. It's Vivian, apparently. Once they were alerted to the shots, armed services people quickly stormed the stage, first dragging off Vice President J.D. Vance before coming back on to get the president himself, along with the First Lady. Other figures from the Trump administration were seated among the audience when the shots were fired, including Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, who, along with his wife, actress Cheryl Hines, was also escorted out of the room. US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was seen patrolling the room in the aftermath of the event, with some online suggesting some telltale gurning going on there. And an emotional Erica Kirk, whose husband Charlie was gunned down last year, was also escorted out of the event. The journalists in attendance, being journalists, spent their time after the all-clear was announced, grabbing the unused bottles from the table. Highly relatable footage there.
That's a real journalist.
That's a real journalist,
That's a
right?
real journalist.
Yeah, hard relate. So what actually happened? Not long after the attack, Donald Trump posted this footage to Truth Social, showing a figure storming security outside the ballroom at pretty high speed. And they then drew their weapons as he ran past. The shooter, however, did not get very far. The ballroom area of the Hilton concerned is on 2 floors, with the ballroom beneath the terrace level shown at the top of this graphic. Now, that's as far as the suspected shooter got, with security stopping him before he could enter a stairwell to the dinner taking place below. From there, the shooter was quickly taken into police custody, with Trump posting this image of the man as he was arrested. He's now been identified as Cole Thomas Allen, a 31-year-old private tutor working in Los Angeles, one named Teacher of the Month, as it happens, in December 2024 by the company that employed him. Described as on the nicer, quieter side by his students, Allen is said to have sent a manifesto to friends and family before departing from Los Angeles to the event in Washington. It's just over 1,000 words long, but this is one part of it. On to why I did any of this. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. What my representatives do reflects on me. And I'm no longer willing to permit a paedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes. Well, to be completely honest, I was no longer willing a long time ago, but this is the first real opportunity I've had to do something about it. I would just say in that manifesto, there were some other parts of it where he sort of sets out who is a legitimate target for him and who isn't. And amongst the legitimate targets were administration officials, Secret Services people if they fired at him, security guards if they fired him, but the journalists were not, staff were not. So he'd sort of set out, a kind of what looks like a plan of who he could shoot and who he couldn't. For some, though, the whole affair was just too unbelievable. And it wasn't helped by Trump giving a press conference just 90 minutes after his evacuation, during which he turned to his current controversial and highly expensive extension to the White House.
We looked at all of the conditions that took place tonight, and I will say, it's not a particularly secure building. And I didn't want to say this, but this is why we have to have all of the attributes of what we're planning at the White House. It's actually a larger room, and it's much more secure. It's drone-proof, it's bulletproof glass. We need the ballroom. That's why Secret Service, that's why the military are demanding it. They've wanted the ballroom for 150 years for lots of different reasons. A little different today. We need levels of security that probably nobody's ever seen before.
That ballroom is set to cost $400 million. In response to that statement, many on X labeled the shooting staged, arguing that it was all a ploy to push the plan. And Trump booster accounts immediately lined up behind the president, criticizing the Democrats for questioning the need for the new facility and thanking God that Trump was getting on with building it. On left-leaning liberal site Blue Sky, the word staged was also repeated in the wake of the attack. But it was this clip from Fox News where one of its journalists called in from within the ballroom that was of particular interest.
I want to just quickly tell you, I was sitting next to Caroline Levitt, the press secretary's husband. He was one of our guests. He was seated right next to me. And, right as the tour was starting, the national anthem happened. And then he kind of leaned over and said, watch you on TV, you do a great job. You need to be very safe. And he was just very serious when he said that to me. And he kind of looked around the room and he said, there are some...
Sounds like we lost Aisha's phone there. And this happens, by the way, especially when you have so many people attempting to utilize the same cell service at the same time.
I mean, that's pretty suggestive, right? You can hardly blame people for forming conspiracy theories on the basis of a call being cut off at just that point. As it happens, though, that journalist later did clarify, believe it if you like, that it was in fact because of too many people using phones in a small space at the same time, and that Levitt's husband had been pointing out people in the room who were sort of journalistically out to get her rather than with snipers. There was also this interaction between Caroline Levitt and a Fox News correspondent before the dinner that got people's spidey senses tingling.
He is ready to rumble. I will tell you, this speech tonight will be classic Donald J. Trump. It'll be funny. It'll be entertaining. There will be some shots fired tonight in the room. So everyone should tune in. It's going to be really great. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
I love it all. And you wrote most of it, you said.
I can't take credit. In true Donald Trump fashion, the man puts his pen to the paper himself.
I mean, you honestly can't make this stuff up. Others are taking the shooting very seriously indeed and using it to blame the left. This was Fox News' Laura Ingraham. At this moment, Donald Trump is the only thing standing between America and socialism. That's why the hard left wants him gone by any means necessary, and why they've bred and fed countless recruits to answer their twisted call. Many such cases. But to be honest, it was Donald Trump who may have best summed up the mood. This was him describing events at his press conference afterwards.
It's always shocking when something like this happens. Happened to me a little bit, and that never changes. The fact we're sitting right next to each other, First Lady on my right, and I heard a noise and sort of thought it was a tray. I thought it was a tray going down. I've heard that many times, and it was a pretty loud noise. And it was from quite far away. He hadn't breached the area at all. They really got him. But so it was quite far away, but it was a gun. And some people really understood that pretty quickly. Other people didn't. I was watching to see what was happening. Probably should have gone down even faster. Melania was very cognizant, I think, of what happened. I think she knew immediately what happened. She was saying, "That's a bad noise."
That's a bad noise, Ash. What did you make of the bad noise at the Washington Hilton on Saturday night? I mean, for me, like, I just can't get over the weirdness of it all. And I don't know whether that's because my kind of gauge of weirdness is now sort of so sensitive, given this administration, that I'm sort of trapped in that. I can't get beyond it to like the facts that might be the case here.
Do you know who I was thinking about whilst watching this compilation of clips? I was thinking about Hulk Hogan. And the reason why I was thinking about Hulk Hogan, there's a new Hulk Hogan documentary that's out. Werner Herzog is in it. And one of the reasons Werner Herzog is in it is that he's talking about the ways in which Hulk Hogan perfected performance. And a sports journalist called Carl Anker, commenting on it, said that we live in a world where ordinary citizens are increasingly pushed to perform in front of a camera. Public figures who have successfully sold a character to the masses have grown in status. Everything is wrestling. Hogan understood it. Mourinho gets it. Trump mastered it. And I think that what you're identifying, which is this sense of unreality, is that one, the Trump administration has defined itself by its lack of regard for the truth. And I'm not just talking about this Trump administration, I'm also thinking about the 2016 to 2020 Trump administration. When Trump was lying about the size of his inauguration, Kellyanne Conway said, well, the president has alternative facts. So you have this decoupling of what's being said from reality. Governments have always lied, but this is a real sort of Marx Brothers level of lie. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? That's the thing that Trump is presenting. The second thing is that when you have this sort of boom of a right-wing influencer attention economy, of which Trump is very much at the top, as well as being commander-in-chief and the head of a state, he's also, you know, top dog influencer in this like particular sphere of communications. Everything is folded back in to this kind of over-the-top performance. So it might be something like a prayer breakfast where you've got Trump in the middle and everyone's laying on hands. It might be something like Erica Kirk's grief tour where she's coming out like it's night 2 of WrestleMania. Or it might be Trump having survived the first assassination attempt where he understood the power of an image, right? Instinctively understood it and stood up, ear bleeding, fist in the air. And everyone who looked at that photo went, that's a photo that can decide an election. And so I think that when it comes to this, you've got all those things coming together, which is you've got the hyper-performative element, right? You've got all of these journalists, cameras trained on themselves, right? Not the story, cameras facing themselves, like Olivia Reingold, sort of go, and like, you know, like pouting and ducking. And she has a sort of incentive rather than to go, what's the reality of going on here? She performs outsized emotions, which, you know, will have a basis in reality because it's very frightening. But that's the story, right? It's her reaction clip. You've got Trump's lack of regard for the truth and his immediate segue into, gotta have my ballroom, gotta have my big, beautiful, gilded ballroom. Which has people doubting, you know, is this a false flag or is this not? And then you've also got that thing of like, Trump is like Hulk Hogan. He's always on. It's always a performance. So that weirdness and surrealness that you're describing, everything is wrestling.
It's so funny that you mentioned wrestling because there was actually a wrestler at the dinner
Shane
on
McMahon.
Saturday. Right. And he was like, his response was like, it was awesome. It was like watching a movie. He was so excited by like
and
the
you
Secret
know why
Service
he's there? Because his mother, Linda McMahon, formerly spouse of Vince McMahon, head of WWE, is the education secretary.
Right.
And so there's a photo of him sort of like standing up very calmly. And in wrestling, you'd call that no selling. Like he no-sold an active shooter. Why? Because I think deep down he thought it was a work.
Interesting. What you say about the attention economy, actually, I was thinking about this as well. I mean, the attention economy, and as you say, Trump is at the top of it, is like a marketplace in one sense of the meaning of economy. But in another sense of the meaning of economy, it's also limited, right? And I think actually what's happened with me is that this administration has been so productive, might be one word of putting it, if you're thinking about the attention economy, and creating things for me to look at constantly, things that are huge. So, you have the decapitation of the Venezuelan government, you have the decapitation of the Iranian government, you have the bombing of schoolgirls, you have threats to take Greenland, you have blockades on Cuba, you've got ICE on the streets, you've got the killing of, protesters on the streets of America, you've got various shenanigans within the White House, you've got endless press briefings, you've got endless administration officials coming out with, extremely heavyweight rhetoric about like the military and Trump and the state and the future. All of it is just, I think, so saturating that actually it's hard for me to sort of grade like levels of meaning or significance. And then when you see this with all the kind of Erica Kirk wearing something that looked a bit like a wedding dress with like massive fake hair being, guided out, and people walking across tabletops. And then, as you say, the journalists all ducking under desks, but with their iPhones like constantly on themselves. I just feel like I no longer have an ability to discern, because I'm so saturated, to discern levels of significance from each other.
And it's interesting, the things that you draw together is, on the one hand, you've got these moral and political obscenities, right? So you've got the bombing of school children in Iran. You've got the support for the Israeli genocide. You've got the kidnapping of, Maduro and his extradition, if not extraordinary rendition, to the United States. You've got all these things which are then also competing for your attention, with Trump being objectively hilarious. I mean, it was one of the things that we were saying off camera, which is I was watching him on that screen, segueing into ballroom. And I was like, this man is hilarious. And what that's doing to my sense of politics and significance is really warped, really, really warped. And so you can see it as a sort of extension of and a development from the Steve Bannon tactic. Steve Bannon said, flood the zone with shit. Yeah. So what you do is you flood, the kind of communication bloodstream, right? The information artery with just shit. And you make it impossible to get a grip on any one sort of atrocity or falsehood, because it's just all of that. And I would say that you've obviously got the zone flooded with shit, but it's also this hyper extravagant, hyper impactful spectacle, whether that's war and war crimes, or, whether that's Erica Kirk's frankly blinding hair.
Yeah. I mean, the zone isn't actually flooded. It's like completely sunk now, right? It's like deep under.
The zone is gone.
The zone is gone. The zone is, you need a submarine. Let's go on to another bit of this story. Now, Donald Trump seemed pretty calm during the whole affair at the Washington Hilton, but there was one moment where he lost it during this 60 Minutes interview on Sunday.
The so-called manifesto is a stunning thing to read, Mr. President. He appears to reference a motive in it. He writes this, quote, administration officials, they are targets. And he also wrote this: I am no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was waiting for you to read that because I knew you would, because you're horrible people, horrible people. Yeah, he did write that. I'm not a rapist. I didn't rape anybody.
Do you think he was referring to you?
Excuse me. I'm not a pedophile. You read that crap from some sick person. I got associated with all stuff that has nothing to do with me. I was totally exonerated. Your friends on the other side of the plate are the ones that were involved with, let's say, Epstein or other things. But I said to myself, I'll do this interview and they'll probably, I read the manifesto, he's a sick person, but you should be ashamed of yourself reading that, because I'm not any of those things.
Mr. President,
and
these
I was
are
never,
the gunman's words.
Excuse me. You shouldn't be reading that on 60 Minutes. You're a disgrace. But go ahead, let's finish the interview.
Actually, it's not often that I find myself agreeing with Donald Trump, but I do think it's pretty shocking for a journalist to be reading out the manifesto of the person who tried to kill him in order to get his comment on it. What do you think? Am I a bit staid here?
I mean, the thing is, it's extraordinary, but contained within that manifesto are allegations of wrongdoing, which are serious and deserve attention. And I think that this is sort of where you get to why the crisis of American politics is precisely so febrile, which is you have these horrendous crimes and a degree of well-evidenced association between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, and no form of actual accountability for it. What you have is spectacle, constant media conversation and speculation about it. You have an administration which says international law and domestic law doesn't apply to us. What did Donald Trump say when he said, is there anything that could feasibly restrain him? He said, my own morality, I guess, my own mind. And I don't know how much trust you put in Donald Trump's morality and mind, but like I wouldn't bet the house on it.
No.
All right, I wouldn't bet the house on it. And then you also have a gun-saturated society. So you put all of those things together, which is you have allegations of serious wrongdoing, complete and utter impunity, and a breakdown of the rule of law where it applies to the administration. You have a media culture which is just super heated, right? Super heated. And that's not just in terms of allegations against Donald Trump. I mean, you want to look at the right-wing media infrastructure from, Fox News all the way to right-wing influencers and YouTube shows, right? So febrile and overheated. And then you add guns to it. So yes, I think it is extraordinary to present someone with the manifesto of the person who, allegedly just tried to kill them. But it's also a moment of politics where you go, how can you not put some of those accusations to the president? How can you not? Because some of those accusations are credible.
Yeah, they are credible. I mean, I guess maybe what you're saying is that the situation, you're sort of dealing with someone who is so slippery and so sort of able to avoid those kinds of accusations or ever answering to them, that actually when you get this chance, which is built around what's supposed to be, what used to be a deeply significant event, a president being shot at, that is the only chance you're going to get to have them addressed properly. But of course, he just threw it back, actually, I think quite convincingly there. You're taking the words of a madman and putting them to me, and you're expecting me to respond. It was never going to get an answer, was it?
Well, no, and I think that's the thing, which is the Trump playbook is attack, attack, attack. So he was always going to play that card in that reversal. And I think that's also the limitations of like a media sort of saturated, hyper mediatized culture with no other forms of accountability. It's not a real form of accountability to see someone with a question put to them.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the febrile nature and the armed nature of American society right now. I mean, Trump is the most fired upon president in US history now, an incumbent president. I mean, the last time obviously he's been shot at twice in the last 2 years, but an armed person very nearby intending to shoot him in September of 2024. The first one was obviously in July of 2024 when he was clipped in the ear, and then there's this one now. But the last president being hit by a bullet was Ronald Reagan in 1981, I believe. Before that, JFK in 1963. I mean, it's testament, isn't it, to the nature, the current nature of US political society, that the rate of presidential assassination attempts is increasing exponentially, right?
I thought you were going to talk about how lucky Donald Trump has been, because I was going to suggest that whoever's got the voodoo doll, which has driven Spurs into the very depths of despair, has also got the one which is protecting Donald Trump. I mean, you just don't really understand how someone gets so lucky so many times.
The assassins are losing recipes.
Yeah, they're losing recipes. You've got, Lee Harvey Oswald being like, come on, come on.
All right, we've got one more bit on this story now. While other guests ducked beneath their tables or tried to leave the room, a true hero has gone viral for sitting still, stoically eating his dinner throughout. He's now been named as Michael Glantz, a top executive at talent agency CAA. And why he didn't seem in a hurry to drop and cover, he told the New York Times this. I'm a New Yorker. We live with sirens and activity happening all the time. I wasn't scared. There are hundreds of Secret Service agents hurtling themselves over tables and chairs, and I wanted to watch. A lot of people said, why didn't you get on the floor? Everyone else at your table and in the room was on the floor. First of all, I have a bad back. I couldn't get on the floor, and if I did get on the floor, they'd have to bring in people to get me off the floor. And number two, I'm a hygiene freak. There was no freaking way I was getting in my new tux on the dirty Hilton floor. It was not happening. Kind of a legend, right? Just focus on your burrata while all around chaos is unfolding.
I think it's that thing where when you are in a genuinely dangerous situation, you learn something about your character. A character reveals itself in a way that no other situation can. And that was the beauty of that film, Force Majeure, right? Where it's a family who are sat there and then an avalanche seems to come and the father grabs his phone and abandons his wife and children. And it prompts the crisis for the whole rest of the film. I think if in a moment of crisis, what it revealed to me about myself is that I'm not leaving my mashed potatoes for nothing or nobody. I'd be quite happy with that. I fear that if I heard gunshots, I might be the person who's like pushing other people like onto the floor and clambering over their heads. I'm worried that would be me.
Yeah, I think I'd like to be somewhere in the middle, kind of, calmly, in an orderly fashion, directing people towards an exit.
I thought you were going to be like sexily cowering.
Quivering gracefully. The Green Party's newest MP, Hannah Spencer, gave an interview to Politics Joe this weekend. Now, I'm not really sure that Spencer meant to, but with just one comment, she's managed to unleash the discourse. Describing her experience of Westminster politics so far, this was the moment that split online Britain in two.
I'm really uneasy about, and I noticed this the other day, when you can smell the alcohol when people are in between votes and as everyone's going in to vote, some people have been drinking in between. Like there's a room where I walked past and I doubled back and looked in because people are just sat having a drink. But again, that's a job. Like I can't imagine if a cleaner did that or someone working in a bank, like had a few drinks and then went back to work, like a bit, like smelling of alcohol, like that wouldn't happen. And I think there's been so many cases recently of like questionable and dangerous behaviour from, allegedly from MPs, but staff, like because this culture of a really unprofessional and worrying setting where people can just drink alcohol and then while they're in work, it's like life doesn't work like that. And when I say that, that is what I find very out of touch about that place. It's things like that I mean, because I just think the vast majority of us that have come from backgrounds of like normal jobs, like that's not how the world works. So why does it work in somewhere where arguably the most important decisions are getting?
So that 1 minute clip has generated an enormous amount of interest and defensiveness, such as this from PPE graduate and man of the people, Labour MP Luke Charters. Breaking news. MPs are human and sometimes have a drink. Classic clickbait farming. MPs work long days for constituents and yes, sometimes share a drink in the evening with colleagues. Last week, I was scandalously spotted with an alcohol-free pint or two between votes. But sure, let's talk about that instead of the Greens' wacky policies. Trying to distract us, maybe? Another Labour MP, Natalie Fleet, had this take. Working in a palace is mad. It's part of a job I struggle most with. Smell of fags and beer at 10 p.m. are one of the things that make it seem a tiny bit normal. I say that as someone who's never smoked and got sober to become an MP. If I ever felt comfortable there, it's time to leave. Others try to make a connection to the Greens' drugs policy, like Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, who said this. The Greens are happy to legalise heroin and crack, but now we learn they think an afternoon pint is a step too far. Make it make sense. Now, sadly for Farage, he hasn't always sung that tune. This was from a Telegraph interview he gave in 2014. I personally think that the war on drugs was lost many, many years ago and that the lives of millions of people in Britain are being made miserable by the huge criminal element that surrounds the illicit drugs trade. And I do think that Portugal does show us that perhaps there is a better, more enlightened way to deal with this. I'm not pro-drugs, by the way, as someone with teenage children, and I've seen fairly close to hand the damage that drugs can do to young people. So I hate drugs. I've never taken them myself. I hope I never do. But I just have a feeling that the criminalization of all these drugs is actually not really helping British society. I think we should look at it, and if ever there was a subject where we needed a genuine royal commission, not to kick it in the long grass, but a genuine royal commission to examine Portugal, to examine perhaps what has happened in one or two states in America and in Switzerland, this subject would be it. Now that is, in short, the Greens' drug policy. Having a royal commission, taking a health approach towards drug legalization or decriminalization. But anyway, legalizing drugs might not make much of a difference to MPs. This was from a 2021 report in The Times. Commons officials received reports last month that cannabis could be smelt in the open space between Portcullis House and 1 Parliament Street. It came after it was revealed that 2 drug dealers were arrested and 13 people were detained for drugs possession on or around the parliamentary estate in the space of a year. Now many sources have described casual cocaine use by a group of MPs, and detection wipes found evidence of the Class A drug in 11 out of 12 locations tested in the building, including places accessible only to those with parliamentary passes. Now, there were plenty of people standing up for Spencer's view too. Those arguments were pretty well summed up by Green Party leader Zach Polansky.
I totally agree with Hannah. This isn't something that me and the MPs have particularly had a discussion about. I think it was an off-the-cuff remark where she said that people who are about to vote shouldn't drink alcohol first. And it's been pretty shocking to me to see Nigel Farage and, to be frank, Labour MPs say that people work 15-hour days, so they should be able to have a drink before they vote. I know lots of people who work 15-hour days, cleaners, teachers, people who are doing, work in the real economy. The idea to them that they would have a drink when they go back to work, they'd be fired for that, and so they should. And so the idea that we have this toxic drinking culture in Westminster where people can go for a drink and then make decisions on 69 million people's lives, crucial decisions to their lives, and not be doing that sober. I think to many people that seems strange. So I'm really pleased that Hannah, I think accidentally, she was just answering a question, but has brought this centre stage into the public conversation.
Tell us, Ash, where do you stand on this issue? Drinks at work for MPs when they're working late at night, doing the heavy toil of administering legislation?
I think everyone has a moral obligation to get pissed on the job.
Oh,
absolutely
great.
Everybody. Now, obviously, different jobs are different. If you're a surgeon, there's a much higher taboo and rule against drinking on the job as compared to having a pint with your lunch or something. But for most professions, if you turn back up at your desk and you smell of alcohol, that will be considered a problem. Now, I think if there was a little bit of honesty around this and MPs said, hey, it's a perk of the job, it's one I quite like. Obviously, people shouldn't take the piss. People shouldn't be, significantly impaired, but I don't want to lose that perk. I'd have a little bit of respect for it. Not every profession is the same. There are different cultures and different workplaces. There are the fancy Oxbridge dinners or the ones that you have to get called to the bar. That's fine. Protect your traditions, but don't turn around and insist that it's normal, like Natalie Fleet did. The smell of booze and fags is the only way in which I feel normal. I mean, no.
And more than I feel normal, in which I feel sort of rooted to my background. There's some sort of claim there, right? About,
It's as if, MPs are miners having their shandy after a hard day's graft down the pit. Don't piss in my pocket and tell me it's raining. It's a perk. You guys want to look after that. That's fine. That's totally fine. What's interesting to me is that Hannah Spencer was saying something which I think is in tune with most of the country, which is it is a really weird working environment on the parliamentary estate. Because it is. It is weird.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that I mentioned Luke Charter's PPE graduate there is that, there is this, I think, really quite striking continuity. I mean, it's not an accident between Oxford colleges, which is obviously where he did PPE, and Westminster. So in every Oxford college, there is a college bar, subsidised pints and drinks all the time. It's not uncommon to see people there in the afternoon or, obviously in the evenings as well, but going there and then going back to the library to write their essays or whatever like that. And that kind of, that is an emulation of, or else Westminster is an emulation of it, but probably it's the other way around, of the Westminster kind of situation. A lot of those people also come through that college system where they've got used to the idea of, a kind of living in a special world, which is just totally different from everyone else's world. And that involves things like your private little bars with your cheap drinks.
There is also a little bit of a different culture within different political parties as well. So there is a huge difference in the level of drinking between Labour Party conference and Green Party conference. I would say Green Party conference, I was sort of shocked by how little people were drinking. And I was like, okay, time for me to hide my white wine spritzer. Whereas at Labour Party conference, the done thing is to drink like you want to die. So I think that there is also a defensiveness, which is when you have your own sort of relationship to alcohol held up in front of you as a mirror.
It's interesting what you say about the Greens, though. So here's a question for you about whether there's a streak of Puritanism in the Green Party. So, I think I associate the left with lots of things. Obviously a certain form of politics, a certain kind of vision of the future, the economy, but also quite a lot of the time with some forms of hedonism and the joy that comes with hedonism. And I think there was something that in the way that Spencer spoke about it, where she was talking about the smell of booze and fags, that struck me as just a little bit puritanical. It's also something in the drugs policy as well, which is we are taking a purely health-based approach to drugs, which is, so we're against the criminalization of people who use drugs. And they're not just talking about their drugs policy is a broad-ranging drugs policy. They're not just talking about highly addictive drugs like heroin and crack, which is the example that everyone always wants to talk about. But they're talking about all drugs. And I was just do I really want like a health-based policy to, is that really the right way for people to be thinking about all drugs? Like, and, is alcohol, is it always, I don't know, is there something puritanical about, at the heart of the Greens?
Look, maybe what you're making a case for is a return to a degree of like Epicureanism, right?
Sure.
So you actually think about the relationship between morality and pleasure and what amount of pleasure is necessary for a good life and a morally good life. And I love talking about this stuff. This is exactly what me and Moya get into, and If I Speak, only like with shorter words and more memes. And I think that that's something which has been absent from politics for a really long time, because an idea of the good life has been absent for a really long time. And I was thinking about one of the things that Lula, the president of Brazil, said during his campaign. And it was something about the right to a cold beer and, a little bit of picanha, like the fried pork and dipped in the flour. And it was
kind of beer and barbecue sort of message.
It was beer and barbecue, right? Love it. Love it. Got my vote. It was an appeal to an idea of good living, which had a relationship to pleasure, which is completely absent from our political context. And I think there are all sorts of reasons for that. I mean, one is the relationship between the Labour Party and Methodism, right? And the temperance movement means that that's quite a strong feature of the British left. Another is, I think, the kind of Protestant work ethic and that sense of, you're doing well because you're steadfastly avoiding pleasure in all of its forms. And then you've got that kind of like, hyper neoliberal productivist mindset of Thatcherism onwards. And so this idea of pleasure and thinking about pleasure as distinct from, liberties or just doing what feels right for you or something which is like purely health-based, it's not part of our political language. So I'm not expecting the Greens to reinvent that by themselves, but I would like it if politicians and leaders on the left could talk a bit about what they think the good life looks like, because I find that an appealing way to think about the future.
Yeah, I think that's probably very true. And it would attract a lot of attention from voters, right? If you had like an image of the good life, which wasn't just about, raw economic measures or marginally improving, someone's take-home pay, but rather thinking of society as something which furnishes people with the means and also the modes of pleasure that are available. I mean, I think obviously austerity has just like stamped out the idea of pleasure as any kind of value or aspiration, because actually survival is what you've got to do. All right. Interesting discussion, Ash. Thank you.
It's driving me to drink.
Former stand-up comedian and current alleged reborn Christian Russell Brand will soon face trial on 7 charges of rape and sexual assault alleged to have taken place between 1999 and 2009. He has pled not guilty on all counts, but Brand did recently admit to have what he called exploitative but consensual sex with a 16-year-old girl at the height of his fame. That admission was made on an episode of former Fox journalist Megyn Kelly's YouTube show. Now Brand has appeared on the show of yet another well-known YouTuber, Piers Morgan, with a Bible in tow. In Brand's hearing on some of the rape and sexual charges earlier this year, the recent convert took a Bible into court with him. Morgan began by asking him why.
Was that the one you took into court?
Yeah, the very one.
Okay. What was your thinking of taking it into court? And what you were seeing, looking at some passages, what were the relevant passages for you?
All right. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. That didn't hurt, did it?
A little bit. It was this from Isaiah. You're right, Blair did say, be chilled. Sometimes I lose the chill, man. It's pretty... It's this. They don't like that, do they, in the old gallery? But remember, you just said it's a hired spot. This is from Isaiah. Excuse me. Man, did I mark it before? It says here, The verse that I was looking at that day was not this. I can't actually find the verse that I had that day, but this is good enough.
Like one of the most excruciating 90 seconds or so I've seen in a long time. Ash, what do you make of it? I mean, there's only one thing to make of it, I guess.
I mean, you clearly haven't watched Spurs play in 2026.
Oh,
There's
right,
way more excruciating moments. I mean, yeah, it was deeply painful. I mean, my favourite thing about it, and I do think that this was actually a masterful bit of broadcast performance by Piers Morgan, because he knew that his silence was so much more powerful than anything he could say. And the punctuation of like the look to camera and to the gallery was in itself incredibly articulate. Because what you've got is this, like, you know, the pages, you know, rustling. You can see a little bit of the handshake. And I think Russell Brand filling the sound of his own exposure with just completely nonsensical mumbling under his breath.
Yeah, grumbling, mumbling, yeah.
And just what I found so telling about the whole sequence is that Bible is full of Post-its, yellow Post-its and purple Post-its.
Everything underlined, literally everything underlined.
Everything's underlined. So what were you highlighting, if not a passage that means something to you? Yeah. And it's the same way Andrew Tate uses the Quran when he's had to, you know, show up for his court dates. It's a way of flaunting a kind of religious affiliation to an audience of men who are themselves religious because they interpret that religion as giving them a carte blanche to behave in any way they like. Like, that's what it is. It's not actually about faith. It's certainly not about forgiveness, and it's got nothing to do with what does it mean to really be contrite for the things that you've done in your life and the harm that you've caused. It's basically about signaling to another piece of the internet to try and keep some kind of following intact.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, yeah, I guess it's an appeal to authority, right? And to the authority of, you know, the great patriarch himself to protect the sort of patriarchal things that you've been caught out in.
I wouldn't even say that. I think it's like brand affiliation. I don't think it's got anything to do with God or indeed patriarchy. It's just, how can I segment up the billions of people on the internet to find my audience, and how do I communicate with them? I think that's all it is.
Right. So finding a new audience with, attached to the brand that's attached to the Bible, I guess. I saw you tweeting, I think last week, about the admission that he made to Megyn Kelly about the exploitative and yet consensual sex with the 16-year-old girl. What was it that you were saying then?
So I want to separate a couple of things, because this woman has made allegations of sexual assault, which Russell Brand is having to answer and go through a criminal justice process. So I want to separate that out from a point that I'm making, which is about, can you have an age of consent which is set at 16 and have no limits in terms of the age of their sexual partner? I think that if we have a duty to socialize young people into sexual and romantic relationships safely, having such a cliff edge where you're inexperienced, you don't know nothing about relationships, you don't know much about your own body or your own desires, and putting them in a situation with a partner who has a lot more life experience, a lot more social status, and a lot more power, I don't think that that's, you have the capacity to consent in the sense that you are free and able to make a choice without coercion or manipulation. I think there is inherently a degree of manipulation in those relationships. And so rather than just blanket increasing the age of consent, because, you know, I think that 16, it's reasonable to say you may wish to explore sexual relationships and you're old enough to make that decision. I would say you should have a staggered age of consent. So if you're 16, you can lawfully have a sexual relationship with someone who is 17 or 18, but not above that age until you're 18. Because I do think that kind of equality between partners is important, and I think essential to being able to make an informed choice.
I mean, there are other realms where you have like staggered age limits on things. So like the military, for example, you can sign up when you're 16, but you're not allowed to see combat till you're 18, which I mean, I also think might be too young. And so it's not like it's a novel for, it's not like it doesn't exist in other areas. I mean, I guess the argument that people will inevitably make is that there will be people who say, oh, actually, I had a really productive and good relationship when I was 17 with someone who was, 8 or 9 years older. And
you may have done, right? And you may have done. The thing about ages of consent is that if you draw them anywhere, there's a degree of arbitrariness. There'll be some people who are 16-year-olds and you go, you are not ready for any kind of relationship. And you may have some people where, they're 15 and you go, actually, you are emotionally really mature, but you fall on this side of the law. There is a degree of arbitrariness to it. I think in general, it's safe to say that a sexual relationship between a 16-year-old and a 30-year-old, which is the example we're talking about here with Russell Brand, is so different from a sexual relationship between a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old, or a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. And, sex is somewhat unique, right? It's something which makes people so vulnerable. It's just you and somebody else. And you think you might have an idea of what you want. And then you get there and you're like, oh my God. And the point about having real capacity to consent, so it's not just about, being able to say yes and being able to say no, but being able to have a real understanding of what it is you want and an ability to act on it, is that that's relational, right? It's not just something that you get automatically at the age of 16 and it's good in every situation. And I think that the law should reflect that the dynamic between the two partners changes the ability of someone to make that informed choice.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't really disagree with you here. I think you're right. And I think like one of the things that I would say in favor of your proposal is that like, I don't think anyone ever suffers from not having a relationship with someone who could be potentially manipulative of them, who's many, many years older than them. Whereas plenty of people suffer from having those relationships. Like the absence of the relationship is not going to hurt anybody. It might have been a good one for somebody when they were 17 or 16, but if they hadn't had it, they would still be fine. They would have had other relationships with people who are more appropriate. Whereas, there are plenty of people who just have really, really been hurt by people who actually, if they were, had sort of sought out the relationship just a few months earlier or a year earlier, we'd be using a very different word for them.
And I think, I remember this from when I was a teenager, is that there was this real culture of like sleaze and fetishization of teenage girls at that point. And I was one of those teenage girls that was like sneaking into clubs and whatever. And men knew exactly how old I was. And that was part of the appeal. And when you look at the allegations lodged by this woman, one of the things that she says is that, Russell Brand would send her on a car to pick her up from school and that she was referred to as the child. Right? That sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink transgressiveness was part of the appeal. The fact that she wasn't an adult able to make adult choices and be able to sort of exert social power in an adult way. That was part of the appeal. And I do think that part of socializing young people safely into sexuality is to protect them from that a bit.
Ahead of the local elections next week, plagued Prime Minister Keir Starmer managed to grab a positive headline this morning. Good for him. Figures from the Office of National Statistics show a 1% drop in the number of shoplifting reports this year, with Starmer saying new technology to help tackle theft plus a tougher charging regime is behind the fall. Given that there were 500,000 reports of shoplifting across England and Wales last year, a 1% drop is not massive. And those figures very likely hide a lot of variation when it comes to why people are stealing. The most attention-grabbing cases are those involving raids or shoplifting gangs. But the issue is much, much wider, with the chair of Marks & Spencer, Archie Norman, last week saying that self-checkouts are turning honest shoppers into shoplifters. Now, Norman blamed automatic checkouts that were too complicated for turning the middle classes to thievery. I wonder if he says that about other people. But over in the US, some are looking to political explanations for the uptick in shoplifting. And that was the subject of a New York Times discussion between left-wing streamer Hassan Piker and New Yorker writer Gia Tolentino. Here's one part of it.
I'm pro stealing from big corporations because, they steal quite a bit more from their own workers. However, one thing that might even help your ethical dilemma is the fact that the automated process that they design, these companies know will increase shrink, right? So it's actually factored in. The lemons that you stole are factored into the bottom line of these mega corporations regardless, and they still end up having increased profit margins because they no longer have to pay the cashiers that they used to hire, as opposed to this automated system, knowing full well that people are still going to be able to still steal a lot more efficiently, as a matter of fact, through the automated process.
Totally. Well, I was looking things up, and shrinkage is roughly equal internally as externally. Like they expect it from their employees that they are sort of disenfranchising constantly.
Yeah.
But what about the argument that if everyone just starts stealing wantonly from these self-checkout machines, Whole Foods will eventually raise the prices?
Yeah, chaos, full chaos. Let's go. I mean, look, I'm in favor of fast and free buses and also government-owned storefronts. And, two of those policies, the mayor of this beautiful city is currently working on.
Would you encourage stealing in the same way from a Mamdani-run city-owned grocery store with lower prices? And why?
I would not, because I feel like that's taxpayer funded, and the prices are this union labor, and the prices are also adjusted regardless.
Now, Gia Tolentino wasn't sure about the political aspect of Piker's claim there.
It doesn't work for me as a form of direct action because it's concealed, right? Like any successful direct action in history has to be ostentatious, has to make itself known, is ideally collective, and this is sort of necessarily individual and hidden. But I'm like, oh, great, let's think of ways to, like, let's take this energy and let's move it into some other thing. Like, I think it's great that the valence of property is kind of on the table as something to be toyed with in terms of direct action. I feel like we've forgotten there's a long and storied history of sabotage and sort of engagement with property destruction even, which is abhorrent to people. I mean, you remember in 2020, the like Gucci, Chanel stuff in Soho when that was looted.
Well, NYPD is investigating a robbery pattern targeting high-end clothing boutiques in Soho. Latest happening Tuesday at the Chanel on Spring Street.
That looms so much larger in many sort of Bloomberg liberals' imaginations as profoundly more violent in some ways than the original action being protested, right? And I find that really interesting. If someone were to be stealing with a purpose, we love that in America. We do. We can love it again. Mm-hmm. We just have to do it with a purpose.
Now, Piker went on a little bit later to mention lots of features of US society and by extension capitalist societies more generally that made the kind of mass direct action that Tolentino proposed impossible. Amongst them was a lack of class consciousness, with people somehow preferring to identify themselves more with the oppressor class to recognizing their own oppression. He also mentioned the invisibility of structural as opposed to personal theft.
The rules are already designed in a way where if you steal from the poor, you become rich. If you steal from the wealthy, you go to prison. So there's only one direction where you can do unlimited theft and erode the social contract for the 99%. There's an invisibility baked into the system that allows the wealthy to engage in this sort of behavior. Because I mean, it's a cliche at this point, but like wage theft is the most consequential amount of theft that takes place in the United States of America. A similar invisibility exists in structural violence as opposed to individual acts of violence as well. If it's a police officer engaging someone violently, the automatic assumption from the average person is, oh, that's probably a criminal. They probably deserved it. But if there's any circumstance where someone else is fighting back against police, like in a normal protest environment, for example, ultimately, most people assume that that is chaotic. There's a chaotic situation, and that it is born out of the escalations from the protesters themselves, even if, as regular citizens, we're infinitely closer to those exercising their First Amendment rights than those with the power stamping out people exercising their free speech rights. We never look at systemic forms of violence, and we don't look at systemic forms of theft in the same way that we do as individuals breaking that social contract.
At the end of that discussion, each of the participants was asked what they thought should be legal that isn't. Piker said intellectual property theft, stealing that should be legal. It's obviously not. But this was Tolentino's answer.
I have to regularly explain this stuff to a small child, and have so thoroughly explained to her that some things are against the rules, but they're okay. And depending on who you are, and some things are not against the rules, but they're not okay. Like there's so many perfectly legal things I do regularly that I find mildly immoral, right? Like getting iced coffee in a plastic cup. Like I find that to be a profoundly selfish, immoral, collectively destructive action. I think a lot of I have taken so many planes for so many pleasure reasons I have acted in so many selfish ways that are not only legal, but they're sanctioned and they're unbelievably valorized culturally. And I think, I guess I don't really think of any laws. Maybe like things like blowing up a pipeline, let's say that.
Ash, there seemed to be a sort of current of argument there, which said something like structural theft exists, like capitalist theft exists, and therefore individual theft is sort of warranted by the fact that extraction is happening from you by the corporate machinery, so therefore you can extract from the corporate machinery, and that's not only moral, but also political. What did you make of it?
I'd say that shoplifting is a pretty good tracker of the sickness of any given society. So when you think about some of the most commonly stolen items in this country, alcohol is up there, obviously, but so are nappies, same with baby formula. And the reason why those items are being stolen is not necessarily deprived young mums who are doing the stealing themselves. It's people who understand that there is a thriving secondary market for stolen nappies and baby formula because it's prohibitively expensive if you get it from the shops. So if items which are essential to the survival of newborn infants are prohibitively expensive, don't be surprised when you see an increase in shoplifting. All right. So I think it's a pretty good tracker of the sickness of any given society. And I don't attribute anywhere near the same kind of moral meaning to somebody stealing from a supermarket. I don't attribute that the same moral meaning as someone lifting your wallet when you're on the bus, or breaking into your home, or stealing from a small business, right? A shop which isn't a chain, all right? These have very different moral meaning because of consequences, because of impact, because of the resultant feeling of unsafety to individuals. These are different forms of stealing. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that I think that shoplifting is an act of resistance, because one, it lacks a certain collectivity, right? If there was mass organized shoplifting targeting, wage theft, like big corporate violators of minimum wage laws who, don't pay workers for their hours, I'd go, well, yeah, that's an act of resistance, all right? Because it's collective and it's organized. And acts of organized disobedience, even when it's just threatened, can force huge climb down. So when you think about the Don't Pay campaign of a few years ago, which forced a massive climb down by the Liz Truss government over the energy price cap, you go, well, that was threatening, mass non-compliance with the pricing mechanism of energy to force a change. I don't think individualized acts of shoplifting do that at all. And I also think that part of the conversation, which very rarely gets brought up by the left, is that a lot of shoplifting is done because you can kind of get away with it, right? And I think about friends of mine who've got their various techniques. They do it not because they're starving or they're hungry or because they're meeting a secondary market of deprived people. They're doing it because they kind of can. And I think that there is a danger, and I think that there is a danger of leftists sort of abdicating the terrain of talking about any kind of personal morality in favor of only talking about corporate crimes, because it neglects something, which is that we all also owe something to the social contract. The greater damage and harm to the social contract is done by state actors and by corporate actors, by systems and by institutions. But we all owe something to one another. And we also owe something to ideas of fairness, that we all do things that we don't like because it creates a better society. And I think that it's worrying to me to completely wave away that part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think I sort of see what you said. I mean, I think for me, the idea of sort of stealing from a massive corporation like an Amazon or something owned by Amazon or whatever, something that, I think of as doing like a lot of harm, not only to the environment, but to workers, to actually small businesses everywhere, sort of like Goliath breaker of the social contract. It does seem to me like, I can see there's like the potential secondary effect of sort of a breakdown of like moral norms, but I can also sort of think, it's kind of morally neutral here. But the issue for me, I think, with the political question...
But do you think it's morally neutral for someone to steal something just because they can? I don't think that's morally neutral. I think that makes you... That's a knobby thing to do.
Yeah, I just don't know that I feel that that's quite right in all cases. I mean, it's definitely...
Like, I'm not snitching, but I think it's a knobby thing to do.
Sure, I think I don't know if I'd celebrate it, but I just don't think I don't think I'd really judge it, actually. And I think but it would depend. Like when you said like the small business or, that kind of situation, I think that is wrong, right? That is like directly involving an interaction with another person. But if you're stealing from Jeff Bezos, and his shareholders, I mean, does that have any kind of, except for the secondary effect of perhaps wearing down, the moral fabric of our society in some small way, does it have any moral impact? It doesn't impact him at all. It doesn't impact shareholders at all. It's, it seems to be, a crime without a victim.
Well, the thing is that one, these things aren't always crimes without victims, especially when stuff gets taken out on the low-level worker, whether it's the Amazon delivery guy for not ensuring a safe enough delivery, or like individual store managers or whatever. So like that's the first thing, is that in order to sort of maintain the sense of there is a crackdown and this thing is a great wrong, like shit rolls downhill. And so things often get taken out on lowest wage workers. The second thing is that when I see people breaking into luxury high-end shops, I see that as a symptom of anger and disgust, and it's a symptom of the sickness of inequality. But I don't see it as a form of resistance to go, I want a Chanel bag so badly that I'm going to smash up a window for it. I go, that's the illness, right? That's part of the illness of consumerism. And again, it's like, I do think that there is something deeply actually kind of neoliberal to be like, I do what I can get away with, right? That's a Thatcherite moral system.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't saying it was politically important at all to steal from Amazon. I actually don't think that's true, and I think it's rarely the case that you're doing anything of political worth if you are the immediate beneficiary of it, right? It's very rare that you're making a political difference in the world if what ends up happening is you add something to your wardrobe as a result of it. It's probably. But my claim was just that, like in these big corporation cases, I couldn't really see like the moral argument that clearly, except for, as I said, the secondary case. But what did you make of the claim that, Tolentino was making at the end, where she was saying, like, actually, our life is so full of stuff that is immoral, but which is perfectly legal. And there's like moral stuff that's illegal. And she wasn't talking about shoplifting there. She was talking about like blowing up a pipeline. I mean, when you talk about the social contract, surely if you think that there are so many things that we do in our life which is like perfectly legal but is actually immoral and destructive, like the plastic coffee cups, like the flights, doesn't that then mean that we should actually be, on your arguments, being harder on ourselves about those like legally permissible things to do?
We probably should. And I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult is because, again, the behaviour change is expected to be individualised. And so in a way, there's a mirror to individualised acts of shoplifting being presented as resistance, that when everyone is so disaggregated and broken down, I think that human beings quite naturally have bad self-mastery. When it's just you in charge of your own behaviour, you can often be a very poor regulator of it, right? We need to be in some kind of collective system. And from there, we're able not only to exercise some kind of moral governance of ourselves, but you start being able to build something of a moral society. And it's really difficult to act in a way which is in total adherence with your politics, your obligations towards your fellow workers, towards the environment, towards those in the global south, whatever, as an individual. I would say near impossible. So I think that, this is like part of the point which I'm sort of driving at, which is part of how we have that systemic response to moral crises, right? And moral crises of obligation is the law. And so the law isn't the exact same thing as morality. It never has been. But I think all of us agree that the law has a place in a moral system.
But the law is a political tool which is not the same as
Yeah, I want it to be a
morality,
tool
right?
for our politics.
Right, okay. I see. Okay. All right, let's go on to another bit of that
She said
discussion.
communistly.
Like, tied it up very quickly there. Let's go on to another bit of that discussion between Piker and Tolentino, which has generated a lot of blowback. This is from The Atlantic. Something is happening to America's moral code, it said, criticizing the pair's endorsement of law-breaking as resistance. And part of that was earned by this comment from Piker on the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, for which the accused Luigi Mangione has pled not guilty ahead of federal and state trials.
Engels wrote about the concept of social murder. And Brian Thompson, as the United Healthcare CEO, was engaging in a tremendous amount of social murder, the systematized forms of violence, the structural violence of poverty, the for-profit paywalled system of healthcare in this country. And the consequences of that are tremendous amounts of pain, tremendous amounts of violence, tremendous amounts of deaths. And that was a fascinating story for me, because Americans are very draconian about crime and punishment. They're very black and white on this issue. And yet, because of the pervasive pain that the private healthcare system had created for the average American, I saw so many people immediately understand why this death had taken place. Even before they knew who the shooter was or what the motive was, we had universalized this pain.
I think there's something really interesting in Piker's analysis of that situation, where it's like, you know, there's an expression of some kind of outpouring of political energy in response to the killing of the CEO, which isn't necessary, which can take the form of endorsement and has online taken the form of sort of celebration, but it doesn't necessarily amount to it. It doesn't necessarily amount to like a prescription that other people should do the same, right? There's a kind of outpouring of political anger around something which is a common experience for all Americans, which is being fucked over by healthcare insurance, which is understandable, but doesn't necessarily amount to an endorsement of the act or a kind of encouragement for other people to do it. And I was wondering if that's also maybe what we see in like the arguments around the shoplifting case, right?
Everyone I know who's like, you know, be gay, do crimes. They're straight and they do no crimes.
Don't point at me by saying that.
I was saying like
I do
everyone
loads of crimes.
Like there's sometimes a element of I guess like vicarious political meaning that comes from, well, someone else had the balls to do something which I didn't have the cojones to do, and so you sort of like you celebrate that. It forms a sort of emotional release for you. But I think the really important thing that he was talking about was sort of social murder. So when he's talking about the ways in which individualized crimes, and especially crimes of disorder, so crimes which run counter to the social organization of society as it is, that those are hyper visible, whereas the ones which have a huge, cost in terms of human lives or human dignity or stolen wages or ecological catastrophe, all of those things are invisibilized. Many times those are crimes which don't even have a name, right? Let alone do they have any form of policing attached to them. Or there are things which are against the law, but what's the point? It's never going to be enforced. Novara Media, we've done some work on this. We've done some work about how many times are rogue landlords actually investigated or charged by the CPS. I mean, the answer is virtually zero. So I think that that's a really important point to go back to, what is the relationship between law and morality? There is not a one-to-one relationship between the law being a signal of, of what's morally good or what's morally bad. I think what the law is a good indicator of is what's considered morally necessary to protect society as it is. And there's some good stuff in there, right? Generally, not being able to murder people, I would say, is fairly good. But the invisibilization of forms of social murder tells you something about what's being valued, and it's certainly not human life.
But I think it's very hard, I guess, maybe sometimes to think that if you're going to think about the social contract as being important and a social contract somehow involving a regard for law, and yet at the same time, it's like, well, but we always point out how the law just doesn't apply equally to the rogue landlords or to the corporations that might, do social murder to people, or to the corporations that might do wage theft from people. Stealing, killing, being rogue is perfectly legal for these entities, but not legal for us. How can that be a contract?
Sure, right? And, I think all of us would say Robin Hood was a good guy, right? He was not, as Trump might have said, a bad hombre, right? Good guy. Like, steal from the rich, give the poor, we'd say that is not only morally permissible, but it's a profoundly moral act. But I do think that there is something about the way these discourses are playing out in a time of intense atomization that gives me pause, because it doesn't seem to me to be saying the law is constructed to the benefit of elites. And so what we actually need is a system of morality and boundaries and constraints on our behavior, which come from the principles of solidarity and mutual aid. It's actually a lot more nihilistic than that. It's, well, the social contract has had a bulldozer driven through it by Jeff Bezos, so I don't owe anyone anything. And I don't like that. I don't think that's left wing.
Do it together or don't do it at all, right? That is the kind of left wing thought. Do it together or you're not really doing anything.
Bam.
Thank you, Ash, for joining me tonight. It's been great. Thank you. So nice to have you back as well.
I feel really good being back. And look, I didn't mean to add anyone with the be gay, do crimes thing, but we all know you ain't doing any crimes.
Also, thank you to our audience. You've tolerated me very nicely over the last couple of weeks as I've been covering for Michael. He'll be back later this week. Thank you again. Come back tomorrow for another show from 6 p.m. From now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.